I will be dressed more appropriately and the posters will be larger. I hope you could see the video a minute ago where I zeroed in on each poster. Thank you for coming today. Since I last met with the committee at the prospectus, we have performed 2 surveys, one in Alabama All-State and then a confirmatory survey using an online study. The title of the paper turned out to be Characteristics of Tenacious Teachers in Alabama. A comparison and measurement of band directors' grit and self-efficacy for those teaching to work in low, medium, and high SES schools. And we sought to answer 4 questions. The first 2 questions have to do with grit and self-efficacy measures as compared to the job assignment of the teacher and the socioeconomics of the students that they teach. First, we looked for the differences in grit and self-efficacy in those assigned to wealthier schools and less wealthy schools. Then we looked at whether experience at their current job, tenure at their current job, was different, and we controlled for overall experience. Then the next 2 questions have to do with whether or not grit and self-efficacy have emerging factors within them, how the items group together for particular measurement purposes within them using factor analysis processes, and whether or not these are similar to Duckworth and Scherer, who are where we drew these items from and these measurements from to use in our study. Okay, the answer to the first 2 questions is very simple. No. There are no statistical relationships that showed in a significant way between those working with the high, middle, and low SES groups, and this did not change if we factored in experience and tenure at their current job. It did not change. There were no statistical relationships to explore. And you can see here, using the statistical relationships, and I think it's on page 13 of the dissertation, there's a chart showing the descriptives, that the range of self-efficacy scores were 50.48 to 53.47, and the mean was 52.37, and on grit it was 29.09 to 30.15 with a mean of 29.28. And the reason these are not on 5-point scales is that we figured these by the number of items in each and the number of times that they appeared, and it became a cumulative measure. And I'll discuss later on how it would appear on a 5-point scale. But you can tell by the chart it appears flat, and there was not enough difference there to use. There were a few times that it got past the first measure where we could use the chi-square, but it did not continue on to be a significant factor within the measurement. And so no, there are no statistical relationships. Grit loadings in the exploratory factor analysis. In the exploratory factor analysis, there were no double loadings for grit. So every one of the 8 items appeared and was considered for factor analysis. 7 of the 8 appeared in the 2 groups described by Duckworth. The 2 groups are consistency of interest and perseverance of effort. And 1 of the items appeared against the trend or against the designation by Duckworth, and if you look at that relationship within the paper, you'll discover that it was a weak statistical relationship. It was the only negative relationship that was shown. And if we get past that 1 item, then 7 of the 8 appeared exactly as Duckworth indicated. In the confirmatory factor analysis, we had to eliminate 1 item because it loaded in both areas. However, of the 7 that remained, all of them grouped just as Duckworth said. So, grit, if you just look at grit, is grit a useful measure, and does it parallel the way that grit applied to other populations and subjectively stated as factor analysis would require? Yes, it does. The number of groupings is the same, and the way that the items group together is the same. So yes, grit is useful. Self-efficacy is a little bit more complicated, but it's still found to be useful. In the self-efficacy scale that we used, it was from the Scherer study where he was validating a particular a general and social self-efficacy scale. And the social self-efficacy items appeared exactly in the current study as Scherer had them appear in their study. And so social self-efficacy was simple. It just came straight across from our study and Scherer's study. It worked out the same. Scherer recommended or indicated 2 groupings, and I found 5 groupings. However, for the 4 groupings that I found that were not social self-efficacy, all of the items in these 4 groups were exactly as stated in general self-efficacy. So, my 4 groups became Scherer's 1 group. Now, that's not to say that if I reanalyzed Scherer's data, that it would break into the same 4 groups. I'm not implying that. The names, I need to discuss the names. Social self-efficacy, we kept the name because that's what Scherer did. And the 4 groups that I named, there was perception of reactions to adversity, perceptions of tenacity, and perception of ability, and then confidence. And the reason that I titled 3 of them beginning with the word perception is that we were not measuring what they will actually do. We were measuring what they think they will do. So they perceive that when they encounter adversity, they will do this. Well, no one knows what they're going to do until they actually encounter adversity, for one example. Okay, and confidence. There were questions there that just kind of meant, are you confident? Well, I didn't do perception of confidence. I named it confidence. So if you look at the self-efficacy, it is useful, and it will work with the population if you consider the 4 groups as 1 group, which, if you look at the items, that's exactly what they did. Okay? We had an unexpected result. And you'll notice that this result does not have a question. The unexpected result was that band directors in Alabama are gritty and have high self-efficacy. Now, we can talk about the reasons for that in the discussion, but let's just look at why we think they're high. In the previous study, this one was the Robertson Kraft in-press, Duckworth in-press study. They had successful teachers with a mean of 3.98 on the 5-point scale. Well, the mean of all band directors measured in Alabama was 3.76. And we didn't distinguish between the effectiveness or less effectiveness of the teacher. We were just measuring. And the less effective teachers were quite a bit lower than 3.76. So really we're near the top of the scale. And if you look at the Likert scale as described by Duckworth, you have the 1 is indicated as not gritty at all, and the 5 is indicated as extremely gritty, and the 4 is indicated as gritty, and the 3 is somewhat gritty. It's neutral. So our people ranged in the upper end of the scale, clearly above the intended average of the Likert scale as described by Duckworth. Self-efficacy studies are not meant to be put together and to be compared from one population to the next. When I've gone through the self-efficacy scales, I found 5-statement Likert scales, 7-statement, 10-statement, 14-statement. The questions vary. The reason that I used Scherer was because in several other self-efficacy studies in music education, they were referencing Scherer, and I went back to Scherer for this one. And we used the 5-statement Likert scale from the GRIT study and made the wording make sense. And so we don't have a group to compare to, but the self-efficacy is 4.08. That's on a 5-point scale. That's the mean. So our band directors tend to group well above the neutral or the middle on self-efficacy, and so subjectively it appears that we have high self-efficacy and high grit within our band directors. Okay, personality scores, and as stated before, they indicated no difference in the population groups, and the reasons for that could be very, very simple. On the low socioeconomic scale schools, there are normal movements that occur within the profession. Not just some studies have found it in music education, and others have found it in general education, that younger teachers will start there, they will work very hard, and they will move on. That's one group. There are other people that go there as their mission and they dig in. Both of those groups will provide a gritty component to low self-efficacy staffing. And so we could be seeing high scores, high personality scores in the low self-efficacy schools related to those two things. Further, it could be that it takes a strong personality to graduate in music. We all know that it's a competitive environment. We all know that we get 1 hour credit for 4 or 5 hours of rehearsal per week, that our private lesson is 1 or 2 hours credit, and the private teacher wants 2 to 5 hours of our time every day. We all know that there's concerts. We all know that we wind up isolated in the music building and working with each other on long projects more than many other majors would do. This is stated subjectively, of course. But it could be that to get through a quality music program and then to get a job, get certified, and to get a job and to work in the environment where the other band directors around you are like this, then this is a strong personality. It takes one to do this. Now, if it's a false indicator, and I don't believe that it is, but if it's a false indicator, it could be that because it's recommended that when you use the self-assessments, that you align the data with other value judgments about the person doing the self-assessment. Now, we indicated in the self-assessment that we would align with their demographics and the socioeconomics of their school. Those may not be in their minds value judgments, and they're not in mine. That those may not be value judgments that the band directors see would be reflective. So that may not have influenced them the way that other studies would like, so that you are more likely to answer questions the accurate way. And what they did was they provided as positive an answer about themselves as they could, and that's only natural. It may be that they gave this as the expected answer, stated in a way that I wouldn't put in the paper. They may have seen that without aligning it with anything else. They may have seen it as a beauty contestant answer. This is what I know I'm supposed to say, world peace. So they may have seen that and said, this is how I'm going to answer this question. And that could have been affected differently if we had other things to align with. Okay? This being a useful measure, it may still lead to, and through other studies and other populations, to doing what I wanted originally from the first meeting, which was to figure out a way to predict whether or not band directors that are pre-service and undergraduate students or young teachers can be influenced to say you are gritty, you have high self-efficacy, and other factors that we may discover, and that you would be really good to work in these low-income environments. We have thousands of students that are not being served. And you remember from our first meeting that that's a big deal to me. What I'm trying to do is to look at this population of students and say, this could benefit these students greatly. And if you go to a 6A school, or a 5A school that has money, and you accomplish things, well, that's sort of the as to be expected result. Well, I want more of the miracles, more of the people that go into these low SES environments and do a great, great job. So it could still be used to do that. It could be used to evaluate music majors that are going to auditions, risk-taking in music selection and in job acceptance. It could be used to compare music majors of different types. Kemp did this in 1982. He didn't use the word grit, but because that wasn't the in vogue word at the time. But Kemp, in 1982, he used Myers-Briggs, Young, to compare what was going on with music performance majors and music education majors, and the performance majors were found to be introverted, and the music education majors were found to be extroverted and of strong will. Well, if you're extroverted and of strong will and you take Duckworth's grit study, you're likely to come up with a high grit score. So it's possible that Kemp was measuring that back then. Okay? And recommendations just from me. I think this study needs to be duplicated in a similar format, including success as a variable. And I don't know how to define that success, and I'm not saying that I can do that. It may be a subjective thing by a panel of experts that say these are successful or those are successful. It may be festival ratings as a factor in that. It may be enrollment in the school. It may be graduation rate of music education majors versus the school. Of band students versus the school. There are many ways to establish success, and I'm not attempting to at this moment say that. But we need to figure out success as a variable and apply it within this setting. And what that could lead us to find is this predictive measure that we've talked about and the real difference in these directors. Now, this may not fit in the state of Alabama because factor analysis requires generally 100 people in the initial factor analysis. The confirmatory can go smaller, but it needs 100 people to do the factor analysis, and other statistical relationships require large populations. So it may be that it requires several states or a region of the country. I want to thank you for your time, and I'd be glad to take any questions that you have.